All right, so thank you everybody for joining in. I am joined by Yvonne Caputo today, and Yvonne is going to share with us her experience in writing her first book, and she also has another one in the works. So Yvonne, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate that.
I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, so Yvonne, one of the things I wanted to see if you could share a little bit about is just yourself, a little bit of your background, and then really talking about why you decided to write your first book.
Well, these days, I say to folks who ask that question that I'm deliciously semi-retired. And my career went from being an elementary school teacher to getting a second master's degree in clinical psychology, to moving across the state and marrying rather a wonderful man, and not being able to find a teaching career. So thank God for that second degree, because then I became an employee assistance professional. And in that job, I did both therapy with clients, but I also did a lot of training with corporations around leadership. And then someone called me on the phone and said that the human resource professional in their business was retiring, and was I interested? And that was really intriguing because it gave me a chance to see if I could work within an organization doing the kinds of things that I was saying would be good in trainings. And towards the end of that, I was on the phone with my father, my elderly father, and Dad lived on the other side of the state of Pennsylvania. And he opened up and told me a quirky, funny, off-the-wall story about making an emergency landing in freed Belgium in the spring of 1945. And I said to Dad, when he was telling me the story, I said, Dad, wait a minute. Let me go get a pencil and paper. I want to write it down. And these are his exact words. What the hell do you want to do that for? And I said, I just think that this is something that the family would like to know. When we had our next phone call about a week later, I just said to him, I said, if you're willing, start at the beginning. And he did. Wow. And story after story after story came rolling off of his tongue. And maybe about the fourth or the fifth story in, I started to think, I think I have something. I'm a history buff. So there's lots about Eisenhower. There's lots about FDR. There's lots about Stalin. There's lots about the major battles. But I didn't think that I had ever seen anything about an ordinary GI and what happened to an ordinary GI during those times. So it was then I decided that someday all of this stuff would turn into a book. 11 years later, I held that book in my hands.
That is an awesome story. I love that. So had your dad told you many stories or any stories before that? Or was it just he started that?
I knew that he was a navigator. I knew that his plane was a B-24. But I never knew any of the day in, day out kind of things that he did during the war. So all of this was really new to me. And what happened because of the book is even for me more interesting. Somewhere along the way, Dad really began to trust me. And he opened up and he started to tell me those heartfelt, sometimes heartbreaking stories of the things that happened to him when he was in the war. And I began to understand my father in a whole new light. You know, this person that I'd always really wanted to know, started to emerge from the stories.
Mm.
And we grew really close. And the outcome was I received the dad I always wanted. And he got the daughter that he didn't know he had.
Oh, it sounds absolutely
And,
therapeutic for both of you.
oh, it was.
Yeah.
It was. And so I was fortunate in that he waited for me to get home for his final journey.
Oh.
And I was with him. And so that bond is just something that I always wanted. And the other part of this is he saw the first draft of the book.
Wow. That's so good.
Yeah, he saw the first draft of the book. He was in the hospital. I drove home with family to see him. And before I left, that was his Christmas present.
Oh.
And so he was able to see all of these different chapters that explained all of the different things that had happened to him. And he was so pleased. He was just so pleased.
Oh.
When I went to leave the hospital that night, I said to Dad, I said, I'm just so proud of you. And he said, what for? And I said, for your service. And he said, no, honey, I'm proud of you. You wrote the book.
Oh, I love that.
So, yeah, so there's something in this writing that comes out in the reading of the book that I never expected when I first started on the journey.
Yeah. So when you decided that you're going to take all these stories and put them into a book, how did you figure out what is the process for writing a book? Like, did you try to look at publishers? How did you figure out to go to self-publish? And, what does this look like?
Well, I've always been really good at saying, I know when I don't know. So the first thing that I did with the manuscript is I handed it over to a professor of English. And I said, please go through and tell me where all the mistakes are. How do I need to correct this? And she did. And then I started thinking about reaching out to publishers. So there are so many online resources that I scheduled conversations with professionals over what my next steps could be. Mm-hmm. And I did that several times. And when on the third time, someone said to me, where are you in the book? And I said, well, I'm not there. The story is not about me. It's about my father. And this particular person said, well, you need to be there. And I would suggest, to give you an idea of how to do that, to read Tuesdays with Maury.
Okay, I've read that.
Yeah, so I did. Mm-hmm. And so I went back and rewrote the book for the third time. And then I remember my father saying something to me when I would call him and I'd say, how are you, Dad? And he would say, well, I'm on this side of the grass. and I started to think that finding somebody, one of the major publishers, to do something with the book might be a long, long journey. And I could be on the other side of the grass when that happened. Mm-hmm. So I decided to look into self-publishing. Okay. And here again, I know what I don't know. I started by, what's the legal side? What are the pitfalls? What do I need to know? How do I need to be careful? If I'm going to go and try and find somebody, help me do that. And that was really helpful because one of the things that it said in one of the books I've read is to create my own company. So when things happened, that the financial part of things would be separate and not a part of my personal account. And when that was done, then I decided, okay, I don't know what publishers are out there. I don't know who these folks are, and I don't know what to look for. So there's an association. It's the Association for Independent Authors. And I picked up their manual and read it and took copious notes. And one of the neat things about what they do is in the back of their book, they list organizations that are credible and organizations that aren't.
Oh, that's good.
And the other thing that dawned on me when I read all of the ins and outs was that I didn't want to find a separate person to do the cover. And I didn't want to find a separate person to do the proofreading. I wanted a one-stop shop. So in the book, they listed these, and there were 4 that kind of looked good to me. So I interviewed them.
Okay.
And one of them really jumped off the page and into my heart, and that was in Genie in Books and Bonnie Wagner Stafford. I'm a psychotherapist, so how people treat me is really an important piece. And from the very beginning of our conversation, she was interested in me.
Yeah.
She was interested in my dream. She was interested in the outcome. She wanted to know where I wanted to go with this and what I wanted from it. And that was how I chose her. And I sent her the manuscript, and she put it in a blender and sent it back to me and said, this is what I think you need to do with it. So I went into the 4th rewrite, and that then became the book, because her idea of how to structure these stories really made it something that I never dreamed it could be.
That's great.
Yeah, that's pretty basically how the whole thing began.
So from the time that you decided you were going to make this into a book, all of these stories, to the time that you have the book published, what was that? What length of time was that? Because you had mentioned before it took 11 years. Was that the 11 years?
That was the 11 years.
Okay. Okay.
And part of that is that Dad started talking in 2008, and I didn't fully retire until 2013. So the amount of time that I had to really work on it was piecemeal.
Okay.
So that in 2013, I really began this push. And I found Bonnie in 2017. And then 2 years later is when the book was published.
Okay. And you're working on a second book, right?
I'm working on a second book.
So what's your second book about? Would you share with that?
Well, when Bonnie and I were on the phone, she said to me, she said, I think you've got 3 other books in you.
Wow.
And I said, huh?
The first one took a lot.
And so she said, what I'd like you to think about are maybe like 3 topics that you would really feel comfortable in expanding on. And so when we got together on our next phone call, she said, what are your 3? And I gave her my 3. And she said, have you ever thought about doing a book about the 5 wishes? Now I have to explain a little here. The 5 wishes is a document that is called an advanced directive, but it's an advanced directive with heart and soul. You know, so for the people who are viewing this, an advanced directive is a document whereby the person working on it says, at the end of my life, this is what I want. And you name somebody to be your healthcare agent. So if you are unable to speak for yourself, then that healthcare agent can speak for you. And I had already done a legal advance directive with my dad. But when I was introduced to this document called the 5 wishes, I thought, I got to do this with Dad, because this is so much more than the legal document that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Because the 5 wishes talks about, how do you want to be remembered?
Oh.
What do you want your funeral to be like? What do you want your family to know? How do you want to be treated? I mean, it was from A to B everything that I would want to know from my father about his end. So I drove home with the 5 wishes on the seat beside me and was stewing about, well, we've already done the advance directive. How am I going to introduce this to Dad? What's he going to say? I was expecting, again, what in the hell do we want to do that for? And he did say that, but actually I sat down on the bed beside him and we went through question after question after question. And it ended up on that evening that we found 2 witnesses in the hospital, and his signature was verified by those witnesses. So fast forward to that last trip home. The EMTs were at the house. They were working on my dad. I knew that's not what he wanted. I called the hospital because he had just been in, and I said to them, get Dad's do not resuscitate orders over to the emergency room. They're bringing him in. That happened fairly quickly because the emergency room doctor called the EMTs and said, you can stop working on him, let him go. Oh, wow. I've got the DNR. So the EMTs told me that I had just a couple of minutes. So I laid down beside my father, put my arm over his chest, told him I loved him, told him I know he wanted to be with Mom. And the Lord's Prayer was the glue in our family. So I said the Lord's Prayer in his ear, and he passed away. Oh. And all of this is in the first book. This is in Flying with Dad. And when the EMTs took Dad out, he had to be taken to the hospital to be pronounced. They took my father feet first out of his own home. And that's exactly the way he wanted to go. Exactly the way he wanted to go. So if you can imagine Western Pennsylvania, the snow is coming down 1 inch an hour. Okay. The EMTs are putting Dad into the ambulance and I'm going, yes, yes. And the EMTs are looking at me like,
that's not a normal reaction.
Yeah, right. And I said to them, I said, please understand, you gave my father his final wish. He wanted to come out of the house feet first. So Bonnie latched on to that. And it was interesting because when I was doing podcasts, people who would interview me would launch onto that whole sequence. And so Bonnie said, I think within that, you've got another book. So the next book is called Dying with Dad, Tough Talks for Easier Endings. And it's a memoir, but it's my journey of being a little kid and eventually growing into being absolutely comfortable talking with people about death and dying. When I was in the human resource position, I was at a retirement community. And I can't tell you the number of residents who just wanted to talk about it. And a lot of times our staff, they weren't sophisticated enough to just hear them out. They would say, oh, don't say things like that. Oh, we would miss you so terribly.
People are so uncomfortable by it.
They're so uncomfortable by it. But with my teaching and psychotherapy and then working in a retirement community, I knew how to just sit back and listen and also to ask questions to draw them out. So the whole purpose of the second book is to have people think about and start those conversations with their loved ones. Because when we were in the church and in the priest's office to plan the funeral, my brother said, Father, he said, I don't know what to ask for. You know, what's a funeral mass all about?
Mhm.
And I said, I know. Dad wanted this, and he wanted this, and he wanted this, and he didn't. One of the fun things that he said in the 5 wishes was, at the funeral mass, I don't want that part where people stand up and talk about me. If they haven't said it to my face, I don't want it said at my funeral.
Really like your dad.
Yeah, he was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
So when Bonnie said that, and when I heard anecdotally from other people, I just thought, yeah, this is something that might be really, really valuable. So that's the story of how the second book got rolling.
Okay. Okay. Wow. Yeah, I got tears in my eyes just listening to you. Um, okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
Um, so we do have to wrap up. We're almost at our time. But I wanted to see, is there anything else you would like to share just about your experience in writing either the first book or as you're working on your second book, anything that you'd like to share with people who are interested in doing writing a book?
I think the primary thing I would say is believe in yourself. Believe in your story. Believe that you have something to share. And let that be a motivator to keep you going when you have self-doubt, because there are going to be tons of self-doubt. And then the second thing that I talked about a little earlier is reach out to people. There are wonderful professionals out there who can help you, you know, to make that dream a reality. Don't think that you have to do it all by yourself. And I had to get used to the red lines that Bonnie would put through. But in reality, she made the script, or she made the book so much better than I could have ever thought, because of just what she was capable of doing.
Right, right. All right. Well, thank you so much, Yvonne. I appreciate you sharing your story, your experience. Very heartfelt. And I know especially your first book, I love it. The second book, I think, is going to help so many people having those tough conversations and finding out what are those wishes, you know, how do they want to be remembered? How do they want things handled? So I really like that. So Yvonne, one last thing before we go, if you wouldn't mind sharing with anyone listening who wants to connect with you or follow you, can you let them know how they might go about doing that?
They can Google my name, and the first thing that's going to pop up is Ingenium Books. So that's where they'll find more about Flying with Dad. And then my email is fairly simple, Yvonne at YvonneCaputo.com. Yvonne at YvonneCaputo.com.
All right. Well, with that, Yvonne, I just want to thank you again for taking the time and sharing all of your experience. And it's really a big part of your life and life-changing for you. So thank you for that.
Thank you.